Hello, creative, and welcome back to the Empowered Creatives podcast, finding confidence between hustle and burnout. I'm your host, Victoria Hines, creative career coach, helping creatives just like you navigate those twists and turns in your creative career and life. I'm really excited about the podcast episode this week as it was inspired by one of my favorite people, Brené Brown. So I was scrolling through Instagram, which is surprise. I rarely do these days. I feel like I've been so burned out from social media as of late. But I actually stumbled on this interview between Tim Ferriss and Brené Brown. For those of you who don't know, Tim Ferriss is the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, which I've read. It's a pretty good book. And Brené Brown is the brilliant psychologist, social psychologist and researcher from Austin, Texas, who has many, many great books. Dare to Lead is one of my favorites. So they had an interview, and on this reel, Brené was talking about how we collect armor as kids. And every single one of us goes through hardships growing up. It doesn't matter if it's different, even if the tough shit we go through and have to process when we are young is radically different from one another, we all develop some sort of armor because that's how we survive. It's how we make it through the day-to-day and adapt to the situations that life is throwing our way. But Brené further went on to point out that eventually this armor that once protected us stops working. It stops protecting you and it starts holding you back from the very thing that you want to be. This could be holding you back as an artist, in your professional life, in your personal life, in your relationships, even in your own relationship with yourself. And this conversation made me think about my armor and one of my biggest pieces of armor. Like if I were a knight, I feel like this is like the head to toe silver like breastplate and shin plates. Like it's full on. But one of my pieces of armor is perfection. And I know I'm probably not the only one listening to the podcast who this is a armor that you have as well. So I know I developed perfection as a kid because it helped me. For many years, it helped me. It actually helped me excel in many ways. It's what made teachers love me and praise my work. It's what helped me get straight A's as a kid. It's what helped me avoid criticism from my very well-meaning, but sometimes my parents had some high standards for me, being the eldest child. My mom listens to this podcast, so hopefully this is a kind call out to her, but it happened. But perfection also kept me from making mistakes overall, and therefore it kept me from screwing up, having to face shame, embarrassment, and frankly, repercussions. As I started stepping into my 20s, though, I started seeing how much perfection was taking a toll on the energy I had to give into the world. I spent so much time, money, effort on projects, assignments in school. And frankly, when I started stepping away, I started realizing I was getting the same grade as somebody else who spent less energy, less time, kind of flitted their way through the assignment. I wasn't necessarily doing better work than them. Instead, I was just burning myself out trying to show up and do the work that met this perfectionist ideal inside my brain. I can't even objectively say that I felt more proud of my work. And in many cases, to be frank, perfection actually kept me from creating at all. It kept me from starting, which is, I think, the most detrimental. 10 years later, perfection is still revealing its unintended consequences to me. I'm going to share a little story, and then I'll dive into some ways that we can all combat perfection. But in my day job for the tech company, I actually help run onboarding programs for new hires. And I had 2 new hires recently who couldn't join the standard onboarding program. It's this well-crafted, carefully designed program that I had a huge stake in helping to make. And I really am one of the biggest owners of that program now on. I help it continue to run. And I felt really, really bad that they couldn't get this really great experience that we had spent so much time and energy creating just for them. So I decided to schedule a one-off meeting with the two of them just to check in and see how everything was going. So I hop on this call with them and I instantly started talking about, oh, I know this program wasn't as great. Here's what it should have been. Were you able to get this and this and this thing? Are you understanding this thing? Oh, yeah, I know that wasn't great either. Yeah, this really isn't how this is supposed to look. And it wasn't until halfway through the call, you're probably hearing it in my voice already. Halfway through the call, they stopped me and they said, there's nothing you need to apologize for. Their experience as new hires was already way better than what their experience was joining other companies. And it took me aback for a moment because I suddenly realized that this thing that I see all of the flaws, all of the issues with, all of the ways that it could be so much better, and it just hasn't gotten to that point through no fault of my own, it was already pretty good for them. And it hit me that I was apologizing for something that wasn't my fault. I really had no control over the way some of that experience was for them. I didn't choose to pull them out of the standard program and sort of giving them an e-learning option, but I was apologizing because my perfectionism was telling me that I still hadn't done enough. And the result was that I showed up to this conversation not confident and not proud of the work that I had already done. And that's simply not the way that I want to show up in the world. I can close my eyes and see an image of myself and how I want to show up every day. Calm, confident, respected, endearing. I can see myself walking into any room, any Zoom call, or onto any stage and just owning it. But perfection is clearly keeping me from stepping into that full version of myself. Sometimes I'm really good at recognizing it and pulling it off. Other times, it blindsides me, and I don't even realize I'm wearing the armor. So, since I'm not the only one who has been carrying around the heavy armor of perfection, this episode is going to dive into 7 ways to overcome perfection. It's finally time to take that armor off because you don't need it anymore. Hey there, creative. I have a delightful invitation just for you. Imagine diving even deeper into the incredible world of living your life as an empowered creative, including more tips, tricks, and advice arriving straight into your inbox. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, guess what? I've got something special brewing, and I don't want you to miss out. Introducing my oh-so-awesome bi-weekly email newsletter. It's a vibrant community bursting with passion, curiosity, and the love of building a creative life. By joining my newsletter, you'll get first access to new promotions and launches, as well as my welcoming voice in your ear every other week. Also, I'll share with you my creative career audit worksheet, a secret tool myself and clients have used during our own career transitions and pivots. So don't miss this opportunity to be my pen pal, as well as deepen your connection with fellow empowered creatives by heading to www.victoriahines.com or following the link in the show notes below. Thank you for being such an incredible listener, and I really look forward to sharing this exciting journey with you through both the podcast and my newsletter. Now, let's dive back into the show. All right, creatives, so here are 7 actionable steps to overcome perfectionism. I will caveat, this is not going to happen overnight. It's a process. It's a long-term process of continuing to take off piece by piece by piece and recognizing when perfectionism accidentally slips back in. So, way number 1 that you can combat perfectionism is ask yourself, what is perfection costing you? Perfection didn't seem like such a bad thing at the beginning, right? As kids, it helps us in a lot of ways. Perfection can seem like a really, really good thing. So in order to flip our perspective, in order to recognize where it's holding you back, you have to start really analyzing your life and seeing where are all the moments where it stopped you. It stopped you from sharing your work. It stopped you from walking into a meeting with a client or a prospect or somebody who could help promote your work. It prevented you from walking in confidently. Maybe it stopped you from applying to a really great opportunity or job. Maybe it stopped you from switching careers, or maybe even fully stepping into a full-time artist career. Whatever that may be, start to identify what is perfectionism costing you. Number 2, the second step you can take to overcome perfection is pause when you start setting perfectionist goals. So goals are great. You know me, I love goals. They are this wonderful, wonderful thing to set that help you guide you forward in your life. However, it is also important to realize when your goal becomes unachievable or so close to perfection, it might be hard to achieve. Ask yourself, is it necessary? Or is this perfectionist goal a self-imposed standard? Is it something that the external world needs? Maybe a client, or maybe something you really need to show in your portfolio in order to get the job? Is it a standard from the industry or from society or other people around you? Or are you putting this level of the goal on yourself? And just ask yourself, does it have to be that way? Action step number 3, set process goals. I have a couple of really great goal podcast episodes where I dive into this, but there are 3 main types of goals. You have your outcome goals. Those are the dream, the big whammy, the thing you want to do. Process goals are the way that you get there. Process goals breaks it down into actionable steps that you can do every day, every week, every month, something you can actually show up for on a day-to-day basis. Getting a job is an outcome goal. It's actually pretty hard to achieve because there's so much outside of your control. But setting the process goal of, I'm going to spend 30 minutes a day looking at companies I might want to work for, or I'm going to send 2 resumes out per week. That's a process goal. That's putting something that is an ideal back into your control. Actionable step number 4. Aim for a C-. This was one of the best pieces of advice I ever received from a business coach. Launching a business was one of the most terrifying things I ever did in my life. And I don't think I would have done it if I had not have been told at the very beginning that I needed to aim for a C. Granted, I was probably still doing B+ work, but giving myself permission to aim for a C and do it messy was the best thing I could have done for myself. And I think it's the best thing you could do for yourself as well. If you are hiding, not sharing your work, too afraid to apply for that dream job or working for the company you want to, aim for a C-. What does that look like? How can you just do something? Take some action. Actionable step number 5 to overcome perfection is to celebrate your mistakes. This sounds counterintuitive, but it's basically changing your mindset around failure. Instead of looking at failure as something that you messed up on, you're facing repercussions now. You're criticizing yourself for failing. I want you to turn it into a celebration. Celebrate the fact that you tried, you put yourself out there, you did it. And just ask yourself, what did you learn along the way? Step number 6, identify the gray between perfection and failure. Like many things that we are discovering in the world that we live in, nothing is black and white. There are shades in between. There are shades in between perfection and failure. I remember talking to a client once, and she faced a lot of perfectionism when it came to her work. And it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. For her, it was holding herself to a certain standard. But that was a certain shade of gray. She had to find what was that in between having high standards and not being willing to just do it a little messy. She had to be willing to fail a little bit while also keeping her standards in place. Now, only you can set that metric for yourself. Only you know when you've crossed the line. But it's important to figure out what is that shade of gray. Step number 7, solicit feedback from a trusted advisor. Find somebody in the field. Maybe you're wanting to submit your art to a gallery, or maybe you're wanting to apply for a certain job at a very specific company. Find a trusted advisor, somebody whose advice you admire, and get their opinion, get their feedback. Is my art ready to submit to this gallery? Why do you think so? Why not? What do I need to do? Or am I ready to submit my resume to this company? Do you think they'll have an interview with me? I may not get the job, but what do you think? Receive that feedback and get somebody with a third eye who can look at your work a little bit more objectively. We can be so hung up on making the perfect choices in our life that as a result, we do nothing. And nothing gets you absolutely to the destination of nowhere. So, out of all of those 7 actionable steps, I'm going to kind of boil it down into one thing for you to do this week. So your one thing is a journal exercise. What would you create this week if you didn't have to be perfect? Anything in the world. There's no limits here. It doesn't have to be tied to your career or business. This could also just be for fun. But what would you create if you didn't have to be so damn perfect? I give you permission to go create that thing. All right, creative. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and share it with your friends. Super easy. You can share the link over their way and let them know that there's this really awesome podcast that they should listen to. With that being said, until the next time, stay creative.